Hi everybody, I'm Tony at Show IP Interface Brief, and I'm bringing to you 100 Days of Labbing, day number 19. I'm doing a little behind the scenes recording here so I can show some fellow streamers sort of what I'm doing here with my Stream Deck and my mic setup and my OBS and everything. OBS, that sounds terrible. So I also wanted to post a review about my INE CCIE V5 routing and switching foundation lab number 2. I just finished grading it tonight, and I have the results. So let's go over them now. All right. First section was troubleshooting. It says there were 2 faults in the initial configurations. So I went ahead and noted those down because my lesson learned from doing Foundation Lab 1 was I couldn't actually remember what I fixed. So I did find both of those faults. Those were the exact ones that I noted down, so I got that correct. So let me kind of go over how I'm doing my scoring because I'm grading myself. So I like to think that I'm hard on myself because that would be the better way to do it. Although I think my emotions get in the way where I say, well, that should have been this way, and so I'm giving myself those points. I try not to be that way, but it's hard to. You get kind of frustrated by requirements either not being clear or not understanding them. So I've taken a couple of the Cisco 360 or Cisco expert level labs that they have online, and how they grade those, the actual graded assessment ones, is there's a major section with lots of bullet points, and that is a subsection. If you miss one of the bullet points in the subsection, you get 0 points for the entire subsection. So it could be troubleshooting faults. There are 2 bullet points here. If I missed one of those, I get 0 points for the faults. The next major section in the example in INE is LAN switching, which has a couple of subsections. 2.1, which is trunking, 2.2, which is ether channel, 2.3, which is VTP, 2.4, which is spanning tree MST, and 2.5, which is spanning tree advanced, and 2.6, which is layer 3 ether channel. If under each of those subsections are many bullet points, if you miss one of those bullet points, in my experience with the Cisco 360 scoring, you get 0 points for the entire subsection. I believe this is how the CCIE lab exam is. So I'm trying to emulate that sort of scoring to teach myself what it's like to miss 1 or 2. And how if you miss 1 or 2 in a bunch of different subsections, that's the equivalent of just skipping entire sections and not even bothering to do them. So, and again, doing these labs, especially these foundation labs, these large labs, this is something I've been saying since I think day 6 of this journey, which is these labs are not supposed to showcase your strengths. They're supposed to expose your weaknesses, and that's exactly what these labs are doing. And so I take really good notes on things that I didn't know, things that I got wrong, things that I misunderstood, stuff like that, and hopefully it's going to make me better. Some of the things that I've learned from doing the Foundation Lab 1 to this one that carry over, I'm already better at a few things. Like PPPoE, I did not even have a clue how to configure in Foundation Lab 1. Now granted, it's not too complicated. The basic configurations aren't too complicated, but I was able to pull it off here in Lab 2. If you guys remember from my long live stream, there was actually one element in there I wasn't sure of this time, but I know it now. So moving down the line, LAN switching, trunking. I got there's 2 bullet points. I got one of them correct, one of them wrong. One of the things I got wrong was I forgot to turn off switch port. I forgot to enter the command switch port no negotiate to turn off negotiation. And the reason I thought that I got both of these right initially, because when you do switch port mode trunk on both sides of a link, essentially that turns off negotiation. There is no negotiation. You are statically configuring that interface as a trunk. However, You are not actually turning off negotiation by doing that. And so there is an extra command that needs to be put on if the requirement says ensure there is no trunk negotiation on these links. And for that, it is switch port no negotiate. I forgot that command. I didn't put it on there. So, and that means I got a 0 for that whole subsection because I missed one bullet. Ether channel, I got everything there. That was pretty basic. VTP, I got everything there. That was pretty basic. And spanning tree, MST, which is multiple spanning trees. I got that entire 2.4 section correct. However, I did mark it, highlight it rather, while I was performing the lab because I hadn't configured multiple spanning tree since I was studying for CCNP. It's just not something I do regularly, and I wasn't familiar with it. So I highlighted it to remind myself that I need to go back and work on this. I need to work on the commands. I need them to become muscle memory, and I need to understand the theory. So I think I have a good understanding of the theory of multiple spanning trees, but the commands weren't at my fingertips when I needed them. But I did get it right, so I did fumble through it. And the spanning tree advanced section, which is 2.5, I got a big fat 0 for that because actually I remember when I did the lab last Saturday, I skipped this section. I didn't understand what it was asking me. And in fact, since then, since Saturday, which is now, what is today? Tuesday. I have studied a little bit of this theory to understand what some of these things are. The next section is layer 3 ether channel, 2 bullet points, easy ones to get, easy win, got those right. The next one was PPPoE. And although I configured all of the elements correctly, I did stop during the lab to actually look up one of the things on help on Google. I was just searching for it, and it was disable host route generation for the PPPoE session. I didn't know how to do that at the time, and because I didn't know how to do that at the time, I gave myself a big fat 0 for that. The next section was PPPoE authentication. I got that right. That was, I believe, PAP. And next section was IGPs and RIP v2. There are 4 bullet points. RIP, right? Everyone, it's like the first dynamic routing protocol that you learn, RIP. And everyone brushes it aside because they just assume no one uses it anymore and it's so simple and it's no problem. And you know what? I missed one of the bullet points, so I got a big fat 0 for RIP. So I'm not feeling good about that. The last bullet point here that I missed was Router 3 should only accept RIP v2 updates from Router 9. If a new RIP v2 host is added to the LAN segment between R3 and R9, R3 should never install updates from the new RIP v2 speaker. I didn't understand what it was asking me exactly, and I didn't have the commands for it. I remember fumbling around with some access lists and stuff, and it just wasn't working out for me, so I moved on. So one of the things I've learned from doing these labs is like, don't go down the rabbit hole too deep. You need to be able to get back out and move on, or else you can burn up a lot of time. So I left that incomplete, and I highlighted it on my sheet at the time, and so I got a big fat 0 for that. Next section was RIP v2 continued. I think that was redistribute loopbacks and MD5 authentication. I got that, no problem. The next 3 sections were OSPF. OSPF are in different sections of the topology, and each covering a different aspect of OSPF. And I got 3 big fat 0s for each one. Although each bullet point, each one has about 5 or 6 bullet points, I put check marks next to them as I was configuring them, as I was getting them right while I was doing it. But because I missed one thing, I give myself a 0 for the whole section. So that's what I mean by I'm sort of hard on myself, grading myself. I'm not giving myself partial credit for a section or a subsection. It's a 0 if you missed one bullet point. And the thing that got me on the very first one was, it says authenticate all current and future area 0 adjacencies with the password of, and it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 character password. And it says, I just read it to you, with a password of, and it's this string that has 12 characters in it. Well, I know that a clear text is only going to allow 8 characters. So I was like, maybe it just gets truncated. And it did. It just gets truncated in the config, and that's just the way it is. And because it says authenticate all current and future area 0 adjacencies with the password of, it didn't say with the MD5 key. It didn't say with any, it didn't indicate anything about MD5. But the correct answer here, at least the answer key to this lab, was to use MD5 there, the MD message digest key, because that will support up to 16 characters. And I didn't assume that when I read that. So I assumed that it was clear text and that the requirements made a mistake and gave us a 12-character password for an 8-character field. And because I made the mistake in that assumption, I got it wrong. Should filter area 51. There was something I got wrong here on the next section. There's a couple of things. So one of them said configure sub-second failure detection over the interface in area 51. So I think there were 2 ways to do this, and I think I mentioned it in stream. You can do this either by manipulating timers or BFD. The answer key said BFD, and in my config, I did timer manipulation, and I think both are valid. However, because I didn't align it with the key, I didn't mark it as wrong. I marked another thing that I got in this section as wrong, why I gave myself a 0. But I think both are valid answers here, so if anyone feels differently about that, please let me know. Router 3 should see router 10's loopback as a 32, but the rest of the domain should see it as I got that. I think one of the things here was Area 51 ABR should filter type 3 and type 5 LSAs from entering the area. That's right. I made it a totally stubby area, and that's because I just wasn't very clear on which LSAs get filtered for which areas. And I know now that should have been a not so stubby area, NSSA. Next section was another OSPF section. This one really got me, and when I read this in the answer key, I even made a little comment, just wow. I was way off the mark. In fact, I left this completely incomplete. I didn't do this one bullet. There are 4 bullets in this section. I did 3 of them. I didn't do the 4th one, or rather the 2nd one. It says only exchange between Area 0 and Area 52. The only exchange between Area 0 and Area 52 should be via Type 5 LSAs. No other LSA types should be exchanged between these 2 areas. And I didn't realize how to do that at the time, and I'm still just like wowed by the answer. And I'm wowed by it because it is so simple. It is so simple. I definitely was thinking that this was a super complex problem. Not really super complex, but that it was some sort of, stub flag or something. And really, it ended up being pretty simple. So I won't give the answer away, but please, if you guys are doing the lab, man, this is some good stuff. This is some good stuff. Let me tell you, doing these labs was so much fun. I streamed for 7.5 hours Saturday. It was really a lot of fun. I was so energetic and just hyped for like doing all these. I got all these check marks for all these bullet points that I was getting right. And it just makes you feel good, if someone sets out the requirements, you're able to execute, you're able to achieve, and you feel good. It motivates you to do better. And it's fun. And but then to go back here and do the grading and review is really the hard work. And now we have some challenges to go over. Now I definitely have some challenges. The next section is EIGRP, 4 bullet points. I got them all right. Basic EIGRP, nothing big there. The next section was IGP redistribution. It was redistribution between RIP and OSPF, and I think EIGRP all around the topology. I gave myself a big fat 0. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bullet points. 6 bullet points, sorry. And one of the bullet points I marked as a question mark when I was doing the lab, which was prevent loops in the network by modifying administrative distance. At the time, I didn't see loops, and I did my loop prevention via tagging. I Don't know why I didn't do administrative distance. Like looking back on it now, it's very clear. But at the time, it says implement. The bullet above says implement a redistribution plan that will allow the networks to maintain full reachability in case of a link failure between blah 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 blah. So I immediately assumed like, oh, okay, well I'm going to have a routing loop in there, so I need to do some tagging and filtering, and then the next bullet said prevent loops in the network by modifying administrative distance wherever necessary. Well, at that point, I didn't have any loops, because I had done the tagging and filtering prior, but I had missed the requirement here. So that's a big fat 0. EGP, BGP configuration 5.1. I got all those pretty easy, pretty basic. 5.2 BGP, even more. That was 5.1 was all iBGP. 5.2 is eBGP, got all that. And then 5.3 is actually introducing prefixes and some redistribution into BGP. I got all of the BGP sections all correct. So I'm giving myself a big pat on the back for that. Although that's not that big of a challenge because BGP is one of my strong suits. Now that doesn't mean I'm a master, but it means I am confident and professional enough to be able to knock out these foundation labs of BGP. This is not complicated stuff. This is pretty basic. This is what I would expect out of a foundation lab. And I was able to execute all of these elements without flaw. So I feel confident that I'm ready to take my BGP skills to the next level. However, as you've just heard, my OSPF needs a lot of work. So my OSPF skills are not ready to go to the next level, which is why I need to turn back, study a little harder, get in tune with some OSPF, and keep grinding it out. Keep grinding it out. That's why we're here. Next section was DMVPN, IPv4 over DMVPN. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullet points. I got all of those. No 6, 7. They go into the next page. 7 bullet points. I got all those, no problem. And again, remember, I started off this 100 days journey with DMVPN. I'm pretty strong in DMVPN. I feel that I'm strong in it. I was able to meet all of these foundation requirements. So that means I have that. So which means I'm ready to take my DMVPN to the next level. Now we're ready to move up on that. But I still can't because I need to bring OSPF up. So everything's got to become sort of a common average before we can go up a level. You know, I can't go become expert in BGP and not get foundational OSPF correct. The next section was IPsec over DMVPN. One of the elements here that I got burned on during the lab, I stumbled on it for about 30 minutes. But I will always remember this now. It is burned in my brain. The shared keyword on the tunnel protection IPsec profile. I didn't even know that existed. I've never actually implemented these requirements in this sort of topology before, so I've never come across that requirement. I know it now. It won't happen to me again. Because I did execute properly or correctly, everything's good there, big check marks. The next one was OSPF over DMVPN. This was pretty simple. I think this was just an exercise in introducing OSPF with VRFs. This is something I'm pretty familiar with, working in VRFs and routing protocols in and out of VRFs. So I didn't have any trouble there, and it was small requirements, 5 bullet points, easy to grab. Okay. The next section was MPLS 7.1 LDP. It was 4 bullet points. I missed one of them. It says R9 should only advertise a label for its host route, and R10 should only advertise a label for its host route. And I gave myself a big fat 0 for the entire section, even though I got the other 3 bullet points. So actually today while I was at work, I remembered this requirement. And I had a moment where I was just like, you know what? I really want to look that up. So I did some quick Googling, and I found an article. I emailed it to myself, the link to myself, that actually showed me exactly how to solve this. Not for this topology, not for INE, but just out of Cisco examples. How to not advertise all your local labels and to use an access list to be able to, so I guess, sort of filter the ones that you do want to advertise. So I had that link all ready to go. I was going to have some time tonight and and check it out. And then I ended up going over the answer key, and it had exactly the commands I was going to be testing out here in a small lab. So that's great that that was the answer, because now I know the theory behind that by reading some of the Cisco examples of documentation. The next example was, the next section was PECE routing under MPLS 7.2. It was 5 bullet points. I got all check marks. There was a gotcha in here. So in order to meet these requirements, you had to create a couple of new VLANs in the switches that you start off here on section 2. And now we're on section 7. So you got to go back to your switches and create some VLANs. There's one VLAN that's an even number, one VLAN that's an odd number. And the gotcha here is you need to put your evens and odds into the different MST instances to meet the requirements for section 2. And the gotcha here, it says it right in the answer key. I guess the grading script is going to go back and check layer 2, right? When you're all done. And if your layer 2 isn't right, you get it wrong, okay? And this is it's just sort of mind-blowing that they would do this. I mean, it's sort of like, sure, it makes sense. You got to be sharp. You got to know your requirements. But basically, after 5 hours of configuring, when it says, like, create a new VLAN in a switch, I have to remember that, like, oh, I have a requirement that says evens need to be in one instance and odds need to be in another instance, which is going to kind of drive me nuts, because it's going to make me think that any requirement I read throughout these labs, both here through INE, any other labbing I'm going to do, or the actual lab, that I'm always going to be thinking, like, is this messing up a previous requirement? And I don't know, maybe that should always be the case, but I was really shocked at that. But I'm glad that they introduced that to me, and that's why we do these labs, right? I want to sit here. I want to get angry at these labs. I want to put all my frustration into these labs. I want to get so angry with them. So when it comes time for me to do the actual lab, I have nothing to be angry about, right? I want to pull out all my frustration out on these labs and all the problems and all the anger here on these practice labs, because the real CCIE lab, I just want to execute. And it is what it is, right? I kind of hate that saying, and I'm not a fan of it. But I think in that case, whatever your score is when you walk out of there, that's your score, all right? You've done your job, whether you pass or whether you fail, The next section was VPN v4. I configured 5 bullet points correctly, and the one bullet point, which was ensure connectivity, right? You actually had to ping across the MPLS cloud. I couldn't get those pings working, and actually while I was working the lab, I think I finished this lab Monday night. As I was working the lab, I was getting very frustrated with the fact that I couldn't ping across. So one of my to-dos this week is going to be to lab up basically just this section, just the MPLS section, couple of routers, MPLS, just to make sure that I'm doing everything correctly. I'm pretty familiar with MPLS. I don't work for a service provider, so I don't deal with it every day, and I don't troubleshoot it every day. But I've done lots of labs. I have done MPLS in production, albeit probably basic MPLS compared to you service provider professionals out there. But this was very basic MPLS. This was not complicated. And this just goes to show, it exposes my weakness. And my weakness is, I don't think actually in configuring MPLS, I think that's a strong suit, is troubleshooting MPLS is my weakness, right? Not just configuring these things need to be strong. Also troubleshooting these things needs to be strong. So troubleshooting MPLS for me, I think, is a weakness I need to overcome. Next section is IPv6 routing, IPv6 EIGRP. So I looked at the answer key. They used named EIGRP. I used IPv6 router EIGRP. I met all the requirements, right? All 4 bullet points I was able to verify. Just the same as if what they did on named, I was able to do the same verification, the same show commands, only my configuration was different. So I executed all 4 bullet points. I didn't leave anything incomplete. So I marked this with a question mark because I'm not sure how to grade this. I'm pretty sure the grading script or whatever it is in the CCIE lab exam is concentrating on show output and not so much running configs. And I think that's because, if I had to assume, that would be because there's more than one way to configure something to achieve a common show output. So I think the show output would be really the truth, the one truth. So I'm hoping that I didn't give myself a check mark because I don't know how to grade that. I'm just kind of leave that out. The next section is 8.2 is IPv6 OSPF v3. I left a number of bullet points incomplete here because I wasn't sure I wasn't sure what they were asking. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 bullet points here. I only completed 4 of them. I left 3 incomplete. That was really hurting. I think the better strategy to do there, if I was in the CCIE lab, if I was reading a subsection that had 7 bullet points and I couldn't solve 3 of them, I probably should skip that section or do the minimal config needed to make the rest of the topology work and skip it and instead invest my time in in other bullet points sections that I know I can complete. Let me know, what you think in the comments below. Reach me on Twitter. I don't know if that's the best strategy, but that's kind of, what I've heard, and maybe I'll try that. And the IPv6 redistribution, I think that was right, but I missed a lot because of the previous section not being complete. So I got one of them correct. The other bullet point, I don't think I did correct. So that's my review. That's my scores. That's my results. I would tell you my review of the lab. I probably should have started at the head with my review of the lab. I really enjoyed this lab. I really enjoyed the first lab, but I really enjoyed this lab number 2 more. I enjoyed it more because I really felt like a lot of the things in lab 1 were sort of elementary. Even though I didn't execute all of them, and even though I didn't have answers for all of them, and I didn't solve all of the things from lab 1, I thought the things that it was asking were pretty basic. And I thought this one, I felt as if there were more tasks, more sections, and a little more complication. And that's great. That's actually what I wanted to see. I didn't want to see 3 different versions of lab 1. And what I mean is like 3 different extremely, extremely basic versions, foundation labs, lab 1. I wanted them to be sort of stepped. I wanted them to be increasing. And lab 2, I felt like it had more stuff in it. It was a little bit more complicated. It introduced some new technologies. I was happy to do it. I thought it was a really well-made lab. Most of the requirements were very clear. I have a reading comprehension problem that is not a secret. So it's hard for me to sort of understand these requirements and actually turn them into actionable things. But other than that, I thought the lab was really well done, and great job for INE for putting it together. And I'm really looking forward to the next lab, which is going to be Foundation Lab 3. So here's what I'm going to do. I kind of want to lay out my plan here because I think a couple of people are getting some steam with me on doing some of these labs. These foundation labs are great, by the way. So typically I do a long live lab stream on Saturday. I've been focusing on these foundation labs. So if the pattern stayed true, this upcoming Saturday I would be doing Foundation Lab 3. I think I'm actually going to skip Foundation Lab 3. Rather, I'm going to skip this weekend. And the reason is I have a lot of zeros here in my results. So there are a lot of things I need to work on. I don't think I'll be ready to try out some of these technologies on another big lab by this Saturday, by this upcoming weekend. I won't. Second part of that, this Saturday I'll actually be away. So I won't be using my cheat day on Sunday this upcoming week. Instead, Saturday will be my cheat day. Sunday will be a regular lab for me, a study session, not a foundation lab. And the following week, which is the 4th, August 4? I think August 4 will be Foundation Lab 3. So if anyone wants to join me, Foundation Lab 3, that's when we're going to hit it off. Don't forget, if you want to buy the workbook, it's $2.99 at ine.com. Definitely worth it. I don't know how many labs. There's like 500 labs in that damn thing. But this is where I'm getting the labs from. They're really great. If you don't have equipment, you can buy rack rental from them, or you can get EVNG and just build the topologies and do it yourself. I'm running it on EVNG. As long as you have enough resources to spare, it's a great platform for it. I am sort of peaking a little bit, so I know some of the full-scale labs have 20 routers, no, 24 devices. I'm going to need to move to some different equipment or go virtual. Cloud, and do it in the cloud. So that's my plan over the next week and a half, which starts tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, then Sunday, and the following week. I'm going to be targeting some of my weak areas from this foundation, which is why I do these labs, guys. I do these labs so I can target my weak areas, so I can work on these. And so then the following week, which looks like it's going to be the 4th, is probably when I schedule my Foundation Lab 3. So if all of you are looking forward to it, that's going to be the day. Don't forget, I think you can use the promo new10 at ine.com, which gives you 10% off new customers. New customers get 10% off, I think, everything except boot camps. So that will include the workbook. So for $2.99, give you 29 bucks off. I'm not a spokesperson. I don't get paid to say that, but I recommend it because there's a couple of people who are out there who are labbing with me following the INE workbook, and it's been a really great experience of being able to sort of ask questions and do chat and compare notes and why did you do it this way, and hopefully we can start building some study sessions sort of around this, maybe some private study sessions for those of us who are working together on it. All right, this brings me nearly to my close. Thank you all for hanging out with me doing the live lab on Saturday. That was a lot of fun. I did 7.5 hours and I did not finish the lab. In fact, I did an additional, 3 hours Monday night. So it was definitely a long session. Before I so I'm going to go through and do all of the INE large labs and the troubleshooting stuff and everything that I can to prepare me. But I think what I might do is I actually might circle back around and do these foundation labs again in the future. So if anyone's thinking about getting the foundation book and wants to hold off for me to go ahead and sort of restream and do them again live, because I want to be able to go back to these labs and not miss anything. And not because I saw the answer key. I hope to do these labs in 3 months from now, after I've done 100 other labs, so I forget all about them. So I don't know what the solutions are. So they're just another lab to do. I want to be able to solve these no problem. In 3 months from now, or by the end of my 100 days, I should be able to do the Foundation Lab 1 with one hand behind my back. So thank you all for hanging out and supporting, and this is a great little group we have and a great little community. And speaking of community, I want to congratulate someone in our community, someone from Twitter, Mr. Michael Hilton, the voice over IP guy. He's 14 years old. He got his, I think he got his CCENT, and he just got his Network Plus. He just posted that on Twitter. So congratulations to Michael Hilton for that. He's really a go-getter. I can't believe how technically astute this kid is, and how amazing it is. I don't think you can't say enough positive things about someone who goes out and achieves what most people do in their late teens and 20s and early 30s at 14. And he's so positive and humble about it, and it is great. So I hope that he keeps up the positive momentum. I hope that I'm able to provide some motivation, and the rest of the instructors out there who help and mentor. We are sort of fostering our own community. So this is really great. I think that's it. I will say a lot of the zeros, I just have one note on my screen that I was just reading that I want to close out with. A lot of my zeros came from something that I did wrong early on in the lab. And that was there was a dual connection between two routers. And the requirement said I needed to form an adjacency across from router 4 to router 6. And there's a dual connection. So I went ahead and turned on the protocol on both links. And it wasn't actually supposed to do that. So that actually changed my configuration and my output and my results for a lot of things. And so it gave me zeros. I gave myself zeros because if I was running a script and just screen grabbing and matching against an answer key, which is I think the CCIE lab grading script does, I would be failing. I'd be failing those sections, the whole sections, because I did it wrong. I didn't see in the requirements whether it said to do one link or two. In fact, it doesn't specify at all. It just says form an adjacency between the two routers. And I assumed that meant both routers. And because of that, it screwed me up on a lot of sections and future sections that came after that one mistake. So I really kind of got burned there. So these are some lessons learned. One of the things, I'll leave with a tip that I'm trying to adhere to, which was how do you prepare for the CCIE lab when you're not on the computer and labbing? And it was print out workbooks, print out guides, print out requirements, or just not necessarily print them out, but that's my method, and read them. Read requirements. And just go ahead and start thinking about in your head, how would you meet these requirements? And why that becomes an exercise, even though your hands aren't on the keyboard, why that becomes an exercise is you start to familiarize yourself with the language used in requirements, right? To try, so all of these things that I'm getting frustrated on that aren't clear now, I hope that by the time I'm done this sort of lab series, I'm no longer confused by requirements. Now, I know this is written in the language of the authors of INE and all the people who contributed, and that the CCIE lab is written by different authors, and other vendors, their requirements are written by different authors. I think it's important to study all sources to be able to familiarize yourself with the language of different requirements. And so through doing these labs, we're actually doing an exercise in that. And I hope that it helps us all to sort of mature and understand the requirements leading up to the final days of the 100 days of labbing, so we're no longer confused by these things. So, guys, that's it. I've gone for 38 minutes now. Thank you all for hanging out. For the next couple of days, I'll just be doing some regular vlog updates as I'll be doing some targeted labs, mostly probably OSPF. It's what I need the most. Some spanning tree, redistribution, basic stuff, and MPLS. I'll be reviewing MPLS a couple of days. All right, so thanks for sticking around. As usual, find me on Twitter. I'll be posting there as often as I can, and make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. And if you guys want to chat regularly, there's a big group of us on Discord. A link is in the comments below. Thanks.